They're producing for the first hour.
There are more panelists than there are questions.
What channel is the soccer game on?
Fox.
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 Oh, I wonder if I can see it.
That may be our competition this morning.
It's okay. The England-Senegal game is until tomorrow, so no need to panic.
Is it just me, or Josh looks like he has one of those Home Alone chairs?
He just put it. He just flipped in Serge's background. Empty
Oh,
chair.
that's Serge's. Okay.
I was just borrowing it.
Sneaky.
You know, you caused the back end to go crazy there for a little bit, trying to figure out what the heck was going on.
Was it the frozen me or was it the borrowed me?
The borrowed you.
Oh, okay. I thought the frozen me would be more concerning.
We thought you had upgraded to the Home Alone chair.
You're not supposed to know everyone's background so well. See, that'll make a great game for our Kilo show. We can guess the background. Right? By the way, folks, feel free to bring up the show. We didn't have an update this week, so all Kilo show questions are welcome. Speaker. What a great crew today.
I'm going to call it the 0.1 mega show, Josh. How about that?
The 0.1 mega show.
Sounds bigger.
0.1 mega show. Today?
No, on the 19th.
Yeah, shouldn't you do this in Roman numerals?
Mega show. Oh, 0.1 mega. I got you there. Metric.
In Roman numerals, what was 1,000? Was that M?
K.
K for kilo.
Oh,
okay.
well, wait a minute. Sometimes I get the Greek and the Romans mixed up.
I think M is 1,000, I think.
Yeah, so it's the M show.
We'll probably come up with all types of colorful reasons for what M is.
I'm reading a book about the history of the number 0.
Was there a...
Didn't I send you that book, Nigel?
I think you told me about it, and I'm reading it.
And in Roman numerals, what's a 0?
There was no 0.
Exactly.
In fact,
10
as
minutes,
I'm reading this book...
10 seconds, stand by. Hello, and welcome to Office Hours. We're a show dedicated to answering your questions about media and virtual production. We have a fantastic panel today to do so. If you'd like to ask us a question, go over to officehours.global, hit join us, and join our Mukana question and answer phrase. We have typically our first hour, we'll do a question and answer session to answer those questions. We're going to have something special for you today, though. Saturdays are Education Saturdays. We have Dave Trotman for us today talking about immersive media, the different forms that are available today on the venue of education. So looking forward to that. Don't go away. Stick around for our second hour for education. All right. What do we have?
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Andy Kaufman, Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. I do want Andy Kaufman. Has a question. In Zoom webinar, can you promote someone from the audience to be a speaker?
Guy.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do. The easiest way, though, is to have somebody raise their digital hand, and that way they pop to the top of the attendee list, especially if there are a lot of people in the webinar. And once they're there in the participants panel, you can click on their name and say promote to panelist, and then on their end, they'll get a little notification to accept, and then they'll go ahead and be a webinar panelist, and from there you can make them co-host or whatever else you want to do.
Once upon a time, you could promote someone to an office hours panelist in webinar. Just have a little minute to think about that. All right, let's go to our next question.
Richard Lavery in Belfast. We are aiming to scan our theater interior to recreate it in Unreal. Any advice on what devices, apps, tools to use?
Rick.
Yes, I would suggest a LiDAR scanner. I think it's very accurate, and that would be my suggestion. Faro or some other great manufacturers out there.
Thanks, Rick. And Mark?
So there are a lot of great manufacturers out there, Trimble being one of them, and then another one is Matterport. And both of these are used by professional surveyors to go through and survey interior and exteriors of buildings. I would say there's also some that work for the iPhone. I think what you'll find with the iPhone is that you can only go out about 10, 12 feet before things start to lose their resolution and the LiDAR starts to fall apart. So my suggestion, if this is a one-off, is hire a professional company, because it takes a lot of compute power to get that point cloud into something like Revit for three-dimensional modeling and such. So I think it can be a very expensive hobby, and it's hard to make it work in business. So go to a professional company and get them to help you out.
So that's interesting, Mark. We went from LiDAR scanner to professional company, and nowadays people have some LiDAR capability on their phones. What we consider to be something that the phone could handle. Is it more of just a toy in some circumstances?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a toy. It does do the whole process of taking it into a model that can be scaled and dimensioned and looked at for building other models. I think the problem with it is just the lenses aren't able to reach certain distances. So in a theater where you have high ceilings, it's going to be difficult to get a good model that's accurate from a phone. You really need a higher level like a Trimble or a Matterport that'll be able to take all that information and use that and be able to reach a further distance. But I think in due time, if it hasn't happened already, some of this will be coming to drones, and you'll see services using drones inside of buildings to reach those higher levels.
And I wonder if the newly released reality scan would be useful for this, or is that only for small objects, perhaps?
I haven't looked into it.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to throw that right at you, Mark. But we just have a fantastic panel today, so I thought maybe we might be able to cover that. But let's go to our next question.
Next one in from Bobby Rafferty in Central Florida. What are your thoughts on this computer AI animation from Audio Feature? And there's a link to Adobe in there.
John.
First thought was it was pretty fun to play with. Me and my kids are going to be spending some time on it today. It's nice that the little characters use the Fenwick framer to make sure they fit nicely in the center. The problem is you can't have the characters do anything. They can just sit there and talk, and then they'll randomly, or based on your speech, move their arms or legs just a little bit and not in a meaningful way. I think what it points to is in the future, especially in like corporate training or documentation, as we can use more speech to text to animation, it will really help like the corporate training world. And I see a lot of products starting out where you give it a script and it will have an avatar read it in a human-like voice. And that's really nice from a training perspective, because then if you make a change, you just change the script and everything else downstream gets fixed from there. And one of the hardest things in training is if you're making a video and you're trying to do something that changes frequently, it can be a very costly system to maintain.
Rick?
This seems to be a shoot off of Character Animator from Adobe, which is a larger program that allows you to animate characters through some like a camera where you can track parts of your body and your mouth. But the audio animation to me it's pretty crude. It's kind of more like the mouth just opens and closes. You're stuck with some preset animations that are baked into those characters in Character Creator. So it's not super accurate. It's more just kind of fun, I feel, and just kind of a rough animation. But it's fun. If you want to go a little more in depth, check out Character Animator from Adobe, and it's part of the Cloud suite as well.
Thanks, Mark. And Mitchell?
I first saw something that would do this in After Effects, believe it or not, as a feature in there. And then, as Rick just mentioned, a Character Animator. And this site, I did notice that the mouth moved a little bit more than just open and closing and doing that kind of stuff. And as a child of Saturday morning TV cartoons, remembering Clutch Cargo, I think some of the older people here will smirk a little bit when I say that. It's not a still shot with the mouth cut out so you can see the mouth talking, but that's the way they used to do it.
Courtney?
This is a throwback. I remember Microsoft had a program that would do something like this. Can't remember. It was Movie Maker, and like Movie Maker or something like that. It came on a CD at least 10 or 15 years ago that did this. So I don't think there's any AI involved. It's just strictly voice to moving 3 frames of animation of the mouth around and some stock moves on the people. But yeah, they used to have this. Microsoft had one where you could do little scenes. You had backgrounds, you had characters, and you could animate them, and they would animate to any pre-recorded soundtrack or open microphone.
Thank you. What's old is new again. Let's go to our next question.
Mike Beardmore from Reading, UK, with predictions of chip shortages lasting until 2025. What are the opportunities for remanufacturing, refurbing older equipment to production use standards?
Nigel?
So what is old is new again, I think Josh said. And I think that's probably a theme for lots of people, which is while the supply is starting to get better, what a lot of manufacturers have done is completely re-engineered their products. I know a number that spent tens of millions of dollars redesigning products. What you'll discover is some of your favorite products will disappear because they can get the parts, but they've already re-engineered and retooled into something else. And so they've jumped forward. On the supply itself, I can tell you that it is, from what we say at least, it is starting to get better. So what was components that were taking 9 months to turn up, they're now taking 6 months to turn up. And at some point, they'll become, back to normal lead time. The interesting question will be, will there then be a glut of things? So, as this works through the snake, will we end up with an oversupply situation where people have more parts they want that could cause some price crashes? There are lots of other implications, particularly people who have put cash out to buy parts that if the prices drop won't be able to recover some of the amounts. So there may be all sorts, by the middle of the next year, there may be all sorts of opportunities, sales and price drops that happen as a result of the sudden resupply.
I believe that's called the whip or the whiplash effect. Too much, too little, too much, too little, lots of lead time. Go, Courtney.
Yeah, and if you're doing bleeding edge technology where you require, really, 5 nanometer process chips, TSMC is about the only place that manufactures those at the moment. They're building a new fab somewhere in the United States, maybe, but they've scaled back on those plans. So I don't know if that's going to happen in Arizona. Are they in your backyard, John? But
Arizona, 4 nanometer.
Yeah, but that'll be 3 years before that factory is up and going, probably. So yeah, if you're going to need bleeding edge stuff, there's still going to be a bit of a shortage. And depending upon the political situation in Taiwan with China, who knows, that could come to a halt, or another COVID breakout can cause a lockdown, and that can cause havoc too in the supply chain.
Dave?
Well, I guess I come at it from the refurb side. Taking apart or cannibalizing older systems and then using parts to repair some other systems was a pretty big practice a long time ago. But now with the kind of factories that manufacture things with robots and very precise placement of parts, it's really difficult to take apart many of these things and refurbish them. Nigel dealt with the supply line thing, so I won't mention that. But the other thing about remanufacturing is some of the machines that do the manufacturing are quite limited in supply, and so you wouldn't really have one hanging around that could put together the device you're trying to refurbish. So that was one of the directions I thought was restricting that kind of thing. The practice has somewhat gone out of favor to refurbish things because, like cars, they just replace parts. They don't actually fix anything.
Go ahead, Peter.
Just going off of what Dave just said. I mean, remanufacturing something that's built using surface mount technology is almost impossible. I mean, it's a microscope and a human, if you can find it. And keep in mind that a lot of the chip shortages aren't around the specialty chips, the 5 nanometer chips. I mean, we have people that can make those. What really has hurt the auto industry and a few other major industries was the old style chips that are, measured in 30 nanometer kind of designs that they just can't get a hold of anymore.
Mitchell.
Yeah, case in point, this is one of the applications where it's a problem, is I have a benchmark digital audio, digital analog converter, and the fan went out and it burned up all the major chips inside. And when I wanted to get it fixed by the manufacturer benchmark, they said, we're really sorry, but those chips are just simply not available. So there is no refurbing going on in that particular line. They might have moved on to a completely different chip in place of that. And I think that's sort of what's making decisions in design now, is that they're now, when they're designing something, looking to see if the chips are available and which ones they want to base their system on, particularly on DACs and other types of audio-related to digital devices. So I would never have a problem buying a refurb product. In fact, I encourage anyone that's looking at something new to see if there are refurb versions available, because it's going to be one that's confirmed to be really good in a working order. So also be aware of what kind of chips are in it in case you have a problem like I did.
Let's go to our next question.
Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. Can Guy from the DVA store show us how he does such an awesome green screen? How long did it take to perfect?
Guy, I don't think you have a presentation, but what do you got?
Yeah, first, you want to get some composite components, green screen, and you want to light it evenly. You want to use your waveforms and get it to 50 IRE. But then you want to troll your friend, Paul, and put him on the screen and tell him that that's not really a green screen, that's really my background. And then I could just turn off the TV because that's real life. It's not a green screen at all. So there you go, Paul.
Fantastic. I underestimated you, Guy. Let's go to our next question.
We've been punked. Okay, next question from Douglas Carmichael. In the early 2000s, there was a company called the Cart Guys that refurbed cart machines and service for the radio industry. One comment was that broadcasters in developing countries never will go to computers. Would that still be true today?
Courtney?
No. The computers are ubiquitous because they're in everything. And even if they're not a PC that may be banned, that is a computing device, you can get MP3 players that have little PCs in them, or, system on a chip that are running. And you can use, a $20 or a $10 MP3 player can be used as a cart machine to play higher fidelity and longer pieces than those old cart machines could play. And with the right software interface for them, you can have 1,000 different cuts on that little MP3 player. So no, it doesn't make any sense to go back to the old days of, putting those little foil Q tapes on the endless loop cartridges.
I'm reminded of a commercial tagline. What is a computer? Mitchell?
Yeah, we didn't use foil tape. We just used sectones on our machines. But Courtney is absolutely correct. It's too old. Too much manufacturing and design had to go into making cart machines. It had too many moving parts, too many precision machined pieces to it. And I'm sure, as he said, that you can buy a computer that can play audio back a whole lot cheaper than if you bought it. I remember in the 70s when we bought a cart machine, it was like $3,000 to $5,000 in 1970s money. So that'll give you an idea how expensive they were.
The original term computers meant a person. Just saying. Nigel?
I just want to speak up for the cart machine. I think there's something physical about putting a cart in or a deck of cards, hitting a button, having the jingle or the ad play. There was something beautiful and physical, and we've become so electronic. We lack the tactile feeling that gives us. So I feel we've just been unfair to the cart, and I wanted to speak up briefly for it.
I wonder, Nigel, if there might be a resurgence of, we had fidget spinners for a while for people missing the mechanical things in life.
Look, we're all buying Stream Decks. We're buying, things with physical buttons. I think we should start a Kickstarter to bring the virtual cart machine back, because that pressing that button just at the right time or pulling the fader, being the BBC where I worked, the fader went down rather than up, just at the right moment was such a beautiful feeling.
Man, I'd be nostalgic if I knew what a cart machine was. Go ahead, Mark.
So I think Mitchell just showed an actual cart that was played that usually recorded commercials and things on. But the problem is with the technology today, your automation machine and your traffic system are all interlined together so that the billing and the reporting goes out the same, and you can do your as plays and all the reports that are required by the FCC. So at least in this country, it'd be a little hard to go back to just the cart machine, I think.
Courtney?
Yeah, and another thing to consider is nobody makes 1/4-inch tape anymore. That's the big problem. You got to put some 1/4-inch tape in those cart machines, and Scotch doesn't make it anymore. 3M doesn't make it anymore. And I think BASF, was one of the last manufacturers. And I don't know if they're still doing it. There are a couple of custom boutique houses that I think may still be doing coatings on tape, but magnetic tape, but it's getting really hard to find.
Mitchell?
Yeah, there's a lot of things down the supply line. It's an issue because in a cart, this is the actual cart we're talking about. In this case, it was for my morning show on the radio. You've got the tape that's in it, which is a specially lubricated tape because that tape is an endless loop that's constantly turning and running across the tape heads. And a capstan in a cart machine pops up and does the thing here. So to Nigel's point, I'd love the venerable cart machine to come back, but there's nobody out there building these anymore. This one was built, I can see the actual date when it was manufactured, April 23rd, 1993. And I think Fidelipac was the last company that was making these devices. So you may have the machine, but you need these guys, and you need lots of them in order to be able to run it in a radio station.
Nigel?
Can I just say the lack of imagination going on here? The next generation of cart machine does not necessarily have to have tape in it. We could put little MP3 players. We could do lots of things. It's the physical cart. It's not the content of it that I'm looking for. I'm just saying.
Nice. Well, I think we've had some good time to reflect on that. And if you'd like to get the panel's viewpoint, we do have a little more room for questions. Feel free. Let's go to our next question.
Next question in from Serge Blondin in Montreal, Canada. Is the Blackmagic Ultra Studio 4K compatible capture device for Zoom? Looking for a perfect uncompressed device.
Guy.
Yeah, I'm going to say hold off for a moment on this one. So I went ahead and bought a 1 to 8 HDMI, not a matrix. I bought the one that'll just, it was like $40 that'll just kick out. You put in one signal and it'll put out 8. So then I went and got a bunch of capture cards. So we could compare. So I have the cheapest, like $19 one that is HDMI, but it's MJPEG, and then we have some of the other ones from Roland that are supposedly uncompressed, and then I do have the Blackmagic Extreme Ultra Studio Extreme 4K as well. So don't buy anything yet. I'll bring it in here and let you guys see the difference if we can see anything. But I would say, just off the top of my head, that I would go for better camera, better lighting. Those things are going to make a dramatic difference. Uncompressed is going to make a difference if you're actually recording to an uncompressed media. So I have mine set up to where I can record to a RAID and I can record ProRes HQ. And there's a reason to do that, so I can color correct and post. But if you're just using it for Zoom, you're not going to see a substantial enough difference, I don't think. But I'll hook it up into my ATEM and we'll side by side compare them, and then you'll know for sure.
I'm assuming that's post Zoom, but maybe he means pre Zoom. Yeah, I don't know. Let's go to our next question.
And it's from you, Josh, from Pittsburgh, PA. Here are in our panel: VLANs or separate networks for the Internet of Things devices. How best to remove distractions from a production network?
So if we run a production and we have our home network that also has some IoT devices, my question for the panel is, should we run VLANs, separate networks, benefits, retractions of each, how to cut that network chatter for a production system? Dave.
I don't have any IoT in my house, but I just presumed that they mostly operate on Wi-Fi, that you wouldn't Ethernet your fridge. So I think separate-wise, it would be the Wi-Fi versus direct line combination that would separate them.
Courtney?
Yeah, you could put them on a different subnet, but what I do is all my IoT stuff is, and almost all the IoT stuff is 2.4 gigahertz only. So I just put all the IoT stuff on I have a dual band router, put all the IoT stuff on the 2.4, and all the media and data stuff is on 5 gigahertz. That goes around, and if you want to, you could set them up as a separate SSID for each frequency, each band. And you got to be careful about some of these new routers have a single SSID, and then it just picks whichever band it gets the reception best on, but you have to turn that off so it won't be sending stuff over the 2.4 because it gets through walls a little bit better.
Peter.
I was about to say, what I do in my house, Josh, is, first of all my production stuff is wired. All the IoT stuff, of course, is wireless, and it's on a unique SSID to keep it away from my traffic, and it's on a different subnet. So I don't have to actually see it when I scan my network unless I deliberately scan that subnet.
And Peter, may I ask, do you have a convenient way of shutting that subnet down?
Yeah, it's called my phone.
So I take it from the app?
From the app.
Nice. Nigel?
So I think the answer is VLANs plus QoS. So I think it's a bit more complicated, depending how many devices you have in your house or how many IoT things. And in a modern large house, you can have hundreds, if not thousands, of IoT devices with every shade, every light having its own IP address. I think you end up doing two different things. You first of all end up trying to get as much wired as you can and leave the wireless to your iPad and your devices like that. You try and build VLANs, and then you do something called QoS, quality of service. So you can, within a VLAN, give different priorities to different types of traffic. And so if it gets big enough, that's where you need to go. And a managed router should allow a mixture of VLANs and QoS. And I actually think, Josh, this is a subject that it really is a second hour, because I have about 1,000 VLAN questions. I've just told you everything I sort of know on the subject. I think this is something we could really double click on.
I agree. There's a lot of internet networking and IT questions that we could use for a second hour. We'll have to hit up our IT council on that. Mickey from the chat mentions that you can create firewall rules and allow traversal of specific traffic between VLANs for things such as control. That seems to be getting a popular answer. Thanks, Mickey, in the chat. Let's go to our next question.
From Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. Paul asks, Chris Fenwick says he watches over 100 YouTube videos a day. Does anyone else on the panel or of the producers, note in the chat, come even close to this or exceed this?
Courtney?
I haven't counted, but probably, because that's my next go-to. I find that I am watching, and I have Netflix and, Amazon and Disney and, all these streaming services that have all this original content out there. But plus I'm on, mailing lists for, screeners. But I end up watching a lot of YouTube and instructional, short instructional stuff, history stuff. I have the ability I like to watch the monologues of late night comedians, but I don't stay up that late, and they post them right after they do them live at about between 5 and 7 o'clock between 5 and 8 o'clock on the West Coast. So I can watch the opening monologue for all the late night show, variety shows before I go to bed. They don't even air till 11:30 here. So I get to see all of those and watch them on YouTube, and they post them on YouTube. So I do watch a lot of them. And since I have my little YouTube viewer that doesn't play commercials, I'm not, timed out with a pre-roll and a post-roll and a mid-roll.
I know that Paul mentions 100 discrete videos, but I mean, with YouTube Shorts nowadays, you probably a more impressive technique would be total watch time. And I have to say that what would be an interesting statistic for me would be how much of my life I've been able to buy back for my YouTube premium subscriptions to keep those commercials from rolling. Nigel?
Yeah, I was just going to say what you were going to say, I think, which is, I don't know, I watch 100 different videos, but it's probably the channel that I watch most, like Courtney, versus typical streaming television. I think you have to bite the bullet and find a way to watch it without the adverts. I'm not sure I quite understood what was said before, but I paid the subscription. And I found that and managing my subscriptions and my channels on YouTube really makes that experience much easier. And I would tell you that this YouTube short thing is a great way to kill an hour at an airport while you're waiting and you don't want to do anything else. Although I am very concerned about how it decides what I should see, because I am getting a lot of pimple popping stuff at the moment. And I don't know whether that implies that I've been searching for something or just it thinks that's my style.
Is that a metaphor for something?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, watch those search terms. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think it's possible, but I think Chris may be exaggerating a little bit. But here's a case in point. In my situation, when I'm editing or doing something in After Effects, instead of going into the manual and trying to figure out how to do a thing, it's much easier just to search YouTube, and then you got instructions right there online helping you out. It's as if somebody's sitting next to you giving you instructions, and that could happen maybe 20 or 30 times in a full day of work. Even the rest of the day, if I fill it with cat videos on YouTube, it's just not quite enough to make it to 100.
All right. We hope that at least some of those viewing hours will be from office hours. Let's go to our next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, Senator Markey has advocated for car makers to maintain AM radio receivers in cars because of the utility of AM in emergency situations and the resilient radio broadcast infrastructure. What sort of resiliencies would be in the audio RF chain?
Good, Mitchell.
I would question that logic because AM has become increasingly hard to separate from the amount of noise that's out there. Back when I used to listen to AM, way back in the 70s, there were a lot less fluorescent lights and hard supplies, switching power supplies, and just general noise because it was more important. I think FM is still more resilient in terms of a format. The other reason why you won't see car manufacturers investing a lot in current AM is that at least it's being considered a repack of the AM frequencies that are available to licensed users out there. What that means is the FCC is deciding whether or not they want to change the whole technical nature of the AM radio frequencies, not necessarily the technology, but the frequencies and how they digitize that and pack more channels within a certain amount of space. I think it's going to go that route. So that's a future thing that hasn't been accommodated for in the current technology, and it's sort of allowing car makers to stop making AM receivers. In fact, there are some cars out there that don't have them.
As long as they have headphone jacks. John?
I am not a radio technician, but I assume the resiliency factor comes from the fact that there are so many different locations from which you can broadcast that are not dependent on each other from an infrastructure perspective, whereas there's relatively few internet carriers to use the internet as that sort of media.
Dave?
Yeah, I go with that as well. The emergency frequencies in shortwave, single sideband, ham radio are usually what they rely on for emergencies. So if you've got an earthquake zone and all the infrastructure's gone dead, there's a lot of people who have ham operators nearby who can relay. And this is a practice for emergencies that I've seen with even citizen band. We have a group here in the north where if you have an emergency, there's a whole bunch of citizen band guys who sit on their radios all day relaying stuff back and forth from emergency services to local people. And that is a much more resilient system because it's in everyone, well, all the participants' homes. It's not in my home. But if I needed to get access to the emergency service, I don't think I'd go to AM radio. I'd be looking at shortwave, and I'd look for ham operators in my neighborhood who can help us out.
Interesting safety precaution, Dave. You talk about relying on a ham operator in your neighborhood. So maybe for those of us that are packing our go bags or emergency things, what would be a good investment so that we don't have to rely on our local neighborhood ham operator?
Well, there's a lot of wind-up radios you can get, for both camping and for emergencies. And wind-up radios usually have all of the shortwave frequencies that the world shares.
Okay. Thank you. Courtney?
Yeah, for emergencies, I have a little digital shortwave FM AM radio that's battery powered and can tune in the shortwave radio frequencies. But I think as far as emergency broadcasts, we're moving more towards cellular because most cellular towers have battery backup on them. And a lot of them have a microwave backhaul on them. So they're not dependent on any type of networking connection or fiber connection that comes in, so that they can, by the sake of their battery powered with, some of them have solar recharging on those batteries, so that they can stay on air for a lot more. And plus the cellular network has the ability to alert you, even if you're not monitoring directly those frequencies. You have to, with a radio, you have to tune in and find the broadcast and tune to it. With as we've all known, when our cell phones go in the middle of a program, that they can broadcast a interrupt, silver alert, amber alert, any of those emergency broadcast trips that trip on all the cell phones and notifies everybody at the same time.
Well, since you mentioned cell phones too, it's a recent advent that cell phones are now getting satellite support. So even if the cell towers are down, that might be a viable option. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm going to be interested to see what Mark Giuliani says when he answers, because he actually owns radio stations, and he can give us a little more inside scoop on that. But just for the opinion-wise, the Emergency Action Notification System, or EBS, or whatever you want to call it, will tell an AM or an FM station when to go into an emergency mode and maybe broadcast a generic problem that's out there, or a missing child, or an incoming missile from some other country. But the reality is on the AM side, and I would amend this question to mean FM or broadcast or maybe satellite TV or radio. The irony is that AM radio stations are struggling out there, and most of them are automated or satellite driven, so they're not really local. They're not covering local issues. And there's nobody sitting in the chair waiting to read a report or a alert message, because it's all in the computer. So somebody has to generate that message physically to alert people using the AM side. So I really don't see AM as a real viable system for doing that. But I'm sure Mark will do better than I did.
Okay, Mark, what do you think?
So there a lot of good points have been made. I would say if you start from the transmission side, a lot of FM stations that are doing transmission and part of the emergency broadcast system have generators so they can operate in the event of a civil emergency. If you look at the receiver side, it's going to be very difficult in a civil emergency to probably run a TV set off of batteries. Yes, you can go get a separate, battery pack that's large enough, or you may be lucky enough to have a generator running at your home. But in most cases, people are going to turn to a radio because they have a radio on standby. It runs on batteries. It can pick up a radio station, and they can find out what's happening. Courtney brought up some interesting questions about using cellular. The issue I think there may be, and Courtney may have a response, is that most cellular towers can only handle so many connections. So I'm not sure how a transmission going over a cellular network is going to be able to, send out a mass signal to everyone, whereas the radio just does that out of the way it's designed.
Nigel.
I think reality will have to set into this conversation. I don't want to get political, but practically speaking, most homes do not have radios. Most homes have televisions and cell phones. Where there are radios are cars. And the truth is that the same people who want the AM to be prevalent are driving everybody to buy new electric cars, which don't have AM radios in them either, but mostly have phone signals. I think what this conversation to me is picking a very narrow band, no pun intended, of thinking and not pushing it all the way through. And I think if we want to have a conversation about how do we create emergency and coverage and how we communicate with the broad populace, we should avoid picking one technology that was very popular a century ago and think about how most people live today and redo that. The answer might be the government has to do something to support the cell phone network or something or ensure continuity of power to people's homes. I just think it's such narrow thinking for a very complicated problem.
I got to say, Nigel, I can see that point too. I was required to learn manual square roots with the explanation that if you didn't have a calculator around, now come on. Okay. So, that was the explanation for that. And I definitely see the ubiquity in cell phones. And I think, the age of our current panel, they're thinking about things that they're familiar with, but thinking about a younger generation, they would say, for emergencies, I've got to get what? I've got to, find what to do things. So, just my opinion on it. Making the ubiquitous handset more usable in emergency seems like a good idea to me, but just my opinion. Courtney?
Yeah, sidestepping the emergency aspect of the question and going back to, availability of AM radio in cars. And I disagree with Mitch. I think, I tune across the AM band in my car these days, and it's almost all talk radio and it's almost all live. And some of it's syndicated, but a lot of it's live local, at least here in LA it is. So either news radio is almost all AM these days. So you get local news and stuff over AM radio in a car. And I think maybe the only reason some electric vehicle manufacturers are leaving it out is because of the interference factor. You've got so much high voltage electric switching that's going on in those electric vehicles that it may be generating too much interference in the AM band. So that may be why they're not putting AM radios in there. I have an AM radio in my hybrid electric plug-in hybrid, and it seems to work fine. Listen to it all the time.
Nice. It's not a Tesla, I take it.
And whatever happened to HD radio and stereo AM? Those were things 20 years ago. Now, do we have stereo AM in our cars or HD radio in our cars? They receive them, but you can't tell when you're listening to it these days. I haven't seen a portable HD radio.
I saw some head nods, but I am unfamiliar on the topic. Go ahead, Dave.
Just as an anecdote, my son lives in Japan, and he was woken up at 3 a.m. With a warning on his phone, which he did not know. He thought he had to subscribe to it, but it's automatic in Japan, all the transmissions. The government notified him that a rocket had been shot over top of Japan by North Korea that morning, and everyone was warned that there may be consequences, be prepared. And he had no idea this was a thing until it actually happened to him. So maybe there's a thing going into place that Senator Markey is rebelling against, and it'll be something that we take for granted, that the cell phone is going to be the device we're warned with.
Mark.
So responding to Courtney's HD radio, I've looked into it. We have FM. I have 2 FM stations. We've looked into HD radio. What's been explained to me, and I'm not necessarily a radio guy, but what's been explained to me is that we will lose our reach because we have to divide part of our frequency up into those other so-called channels, virtual channels, that we could have different programming on. So it's depending upon how your business model works and how much reach you want to have for that one station or multiple
and
stations.
Sorry, Mark. JJ says in the chat, yep, my local station has 2 HD stations that I can switch between, 2 of the same frequency. And Mitch, you have the final thought.
Yeah, just a little more because we have time to unravel this a little bit. HD radio is meant to switch between the analog FM and the digital, preferring the digital whenever it can. That's for HD1. And a lot of times it's able to switch and you never knew it happened. And that might be what Courtney was referring to. The problem with HD is that it takes a lot less power to put a signal out. So you may have a radio station with, let's say it's 10,000 watts. The HD transmission that's co-channeled may only be 125 watts. So the coverage is not exactly the same. It should be, but it's not. So HD versus your regular analog FM signal, that's going to be an issue as far as coverage goes.
And that was a fun aside. Thank you, producers, for giving us the time to dwell on that a little bit. And thank you, panelists, for your thoughts. Let's go to our next question.
From Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. Mitch, I told you about the Voiceover Village on YouTube. Did you have a chance to evaluate it?
Mitchell?
No. I'm sorry. The problem with a YouTube link is it requires a little more thought and consideration outside of office hours. So it's kind of hard to do that. But I did do a quick search on the internet to see if I could find their site, and I did not have any luck doing that. But while we're on the subject of these kinds of things, voiceover aggregators, there is one that I use called voicejungle.com. And I happen to be one of the voices on there. So if you want to hear what I sound like, go to Voice Jungle and check it out. I'm sorry about the shameless plug, but that's the only one I'm familiar with that I actually use.
Okay. Well, you have to get on that link, Mitchell. Let's go to our next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. What are your most useful physical interfaces on your desk other than Stream Deck, and how do you use it?
Guy.
Yeah, a lot of us use Synergy to, it's a little app that you can use to have multiple computers on multiple platforms. So I have an LG Quad display here. So I have 3 computers running right now. And you can move the mouse across, but when you restart, like I have my Mac Mini M1, when I restart it, you hit the login screen and you can't log in unless John might be able to tell me if there's a trick to this. But if you get one of these little puppies, which is a Roswell USB 3.0 sharing switch box, you get this little remote, and that little remote sits right above my keyboard, so I can switch physically all the cables and all the peripherals. This thing's only like $59, but I use this thing all the time, so I can hard switch, especially if I'm in a show and I need to take back control. If something crashes, I can immediately hop back physically instead of relying on Synergy. So if you have Synergy, I'd recommend getting one of these $59 Roswell USB sharing switch boxes, and I will put the link in the chat.
Nigel.
Well, I guess the obvious answer is my keyboard, which was sort of following on from what Guy just said. But after that, my MixPre 3 is connected to a Korg Nano Control 2, which gives me a little set of sliders or faders by my left hand, so I can adjust, and the MixPre 3 is somewhere back. But probably the strangest thing I have is a little 2-button switch for changing what goes to my headphones. from two different systems. So I sort of operate two different systems. I think of my office hours system and my work system. My work system is much simpler. It's just one in-ear system, and at a press of a button by my left hand, I jump from one audio system to the other, and that's probably the most used button outside the control system.
Peter?
Well, I was going to say, well, obviously my most frequently used manual interface is in fact my keyboard, followed by my trackball. But just to do a corollary, my least favorite manual interface is actually the buttons on my A10 Mini Pro Extreme. I much prefer the software control. There are just too many buttons, and frankly, I don't know what half of them do and why they do the things they do.
Oh, if you could only reprogram them. Mitchell?
Well, those are all great answers, and people have a lot of stuff. And at the risk of showing off on my same piece of equipment on 2 shows in a row on 2 days, my favorite device is my Studio Technologies mute button. And I like it because my hand just sits right here on the mute button. You can't hear me when I do it. So if somebody says next question and I'm not ready for it, my hand is right there. I don't have to go searching for a mute button or a icon on the screen. So my fave is my Studio Tech 205.
We like your mute button too, Mitch.
It would be great to have a supercut for our upcoming Kilo show that had supercuts of frequently answered questions on the show. Just a thought. Yeah, maybe that'll be a voting question there. Courtney?
What I like is my my ATEM Mini. I don't have an Extreme Pro, which has the separate HDMI out, because I feed that extra HDMI out to a small portable screen like this. Only it's a 14-inch. It's off to the side, and so I use the 6 buttons on the outside to switch between different inputs into that screen, so I can see the second screen for my main desktop computer. I can cut to the this is the Melee computer, and so that's on one of the inputs, and I control it through this separate wireless keyboard mouse arrangement. And it has this thumb mouse up here, which moves the mouse around by moving your thumb around on this little sensor here. And so that comes in handy to control the Melee computer. Then I have a Windows tablet that I have comms on, which is touchscreen, and I have the touch version of Unity running, so I can just tap that to talk, and I have control over that. And then I have a KVM on my main keyboard, which switches between the Mac Mini and the Dell, and with just a hotkey on the KVM. So I have all of that with just a few screens. So I only have 3 screens in front of me with a lot of things to interface to them as far as keyboards and mice go.
Yeah, we saw some of those yesterday for our behind-the-scenes Ruthless Review. So interesting to see what folks have behind their camera. Let's go to our next question.
And next question in from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. You may have heard that name before. Here he is again asking, do you have a roll-around cart in your house, Guy?
Guy?
I will by the end of the day, which is kind of funny that you bring that up, because we're in the middle of redoing our one-button studio for version 4, and it's going to get an Ergotron desk. And so I get to run over there and go grab this cart, which is an Ergotron cart that I'm going to put my telestrator on. So it's this one. I don't know if you can see that down the bottom left, but basically it's got a pneumatic lift on it. So they're really cool, and they're mostly used in medical facilities. They're really stable. But I'll put a link in the chat to this one. We actually have 2 different ones. The other one that I'm going to grab can actually hold a PC as well, or an uninterruptible power supply, so you can actually run something around with batteries. So pretty cool cart. Again, I'll put a link in the chat to the Ergotron.
Next question.
From John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, what do you do to prepare the way for new gear, specifically a camera?
Go ahead, Dave, and then Courtney.
Well, actually, that's a good question for today, because I completely redid my whole setup just about a month ago, and it's slowly coming to the end of the process. But I began by making a diagram of how I wanted to lay it out, and then I was going to do the wiring diagram based on that, then made an entire list of all the things that I'm going to have to deal with, when I do this, and it includes the camera has all these other aspects to it, and then the audio has, and then my network and everything else had to be changed. So yeah, I'm a planner. I do that all the time, and I work it out in my head. So then when I do it, I'm solving only the immediate problems. I've worked it all out beforehand where everything is going to be.
Courtney?
Well, off-gate plans, gay awry, or whatever it's called, if you speak Gaelic. I had planned on putting the Insta 360 link, seen here, on my computer and be able to switch back and forth between the ATEM, the Insta 360 link, and I have a Logitech C900, HD900 on here too, but I plugged all three of them in to the same time, and I had a horrible meltdown right before the show 2 days ago, where I think it's saturated because this switched into 4K, but it's coming in over a USB 2 port, and I think it saturated the USB ports, and it just totally hosed all of my. Suddenly, Zoom could not see any USB devices, any cameras, or any sound equipment on my PC at all until I shut everything down, rebooted the computer. So saturation of the USB lines is possible if you put too many cameras on it at one time. And by the way, one interesting thing, when I went to shut down, it said Windows said it couldn't shut down because the DJI Osmo drivers were still running. Well, I don't have a DJI Osmo hooked up to it. So that tells me that this little device from Insta360 is using that camera as a DJI Osmo camera, and all of its gimbal controls are probably from DJI.
John?
Appreciate the suggestions. Yeah, I'm hoping to upgrade to a Blackmagic Pocket 6K in the near future. But then I realized that when I do that, my camera, which is like super indispensable at work, like once that goes down, I have to be ready to be up by the next day of work, or else I'll be in trouble. So I'm trying to make sure I just approach it correctly.
Yeah, Nigel?
So here's what happens. When I take something out of my setup, I put it in the cupboard that's over there. When the cupboard is full, I take everything out the cupboard and decide what I haven't used for the longest time, and I dispose of it, give it away, or try and sell it. Invariably, the week after I lose it, I need it. So that's encouraged me just to buy another cupboard.
Didn't expect that surprise ending at the end. Yeah, I'll do that too. Sometimes I have been doing the Saturday shows, so usually my major teardowns happen tomorrow on Sunday to make sure I have enough lead time to get a working system up and running. Let's go to our next question.
From Paul Proskowski in Gainesville, Florida. On the topic of radio, what is FM HD and how is it different from traditional FM?
Mitchell?
Here in the United States, it is an in-band solution. Basically, if you saw I wish I had my telestrator, but I don't have one. If you saw the bandwidth of an FM station, they place the HD signal on the side chain on either side of the main signal. So you might have 2, possibly 3 digital channels piggybacking on the main channel of the FM station. In Europe, generally it's referred to DAB, and it's a whole different beast altogether. But here in the U.S., not all stations are required to have it, that I believe. I think Mark would have to jump in on that. But it is an option for stations to decide how many HD channels they're going to place on top of their analog signal. And generally, the first one is always associated with the main channel. And what happens is in your car or on an FM radio that's been adjusted for HD, it switches with preference going to the digital channel. And that switch going between the analog signal and the HD is very, very tricky because you have to have both of them in sync. Otherwise, you're going to hear a song repeat itself a little bit by a few seconds or maybe as much as a couple of minutes if it's bouncing back and forth. So it's the attempt, I think, of the broadcast industry to digitize FM, not quite the same way they've done for TV, but in a different way. And it's kind of working. I'd have to let Mark comment to that.
All right. And briefly, Courtney? Sorry, you're muted, Courtney.
I did click on it. So I don't know if it's on the single sideband where they used to broadcast Muzak, remember that, in analog days, but now they broadcast digital channel on that. That's received as HD. It's also what carries that information on your car radio, where it tells you the name of the song playing or the name of the show you're listening to on FM. So it comes in as metadata digitally as well.
Yeah, you're referring to SCA. It used to be the thing, and you could rent your SCA channel out.
Yep.
And our final question.
From Douglas Carmichael. Guy, what is that green light atop the monitors in the one-button studio?
Yeah, that is a Reflect Media light ring. So basically, there's a special fabric that you can get that accompanies the Reflect Media system, and that turns the that gray screen in. It's basically lots of little glass beads, and it makes that blue or green. So with that light ring, you flip a switch and it'll turn it blue or green. Let me show you what he's talking about. So here it is on the BGH1. That's if you ask me tomorrow or queue me up, give me a little more time. I have one here. I can dial it in. I'm locked in right now, but I can show you how it works. It's really cool. Or you can just Google it and find it. It's Reflect Media. I'll put a link in the chat.
All right. Well, thank you for that discussion. Thank you, panelists, for being here to answer our producers' questions. Thank you, producers, for really guiding the show with the questions that you desire to answer. And we also want to always give appreciation to our back crew. That this is the reason why our show looks and functions so well. So appreciate that. We will be moving, maybe one announcement before we switch over to our education channel. It's our last week of putting together requests, so submitting content for our Kilo show coming up. After that, we're going to buckle down and start editing something. So there's a little voting channel over there in our future shows. Feel free to weigh in, and looking forward to that coming up in just over 2 weeks. But Dave, we're going into the education channel. What do you have for us today?
Well, a lot of mind share has been taken up about immersive media by popular media outlets today. And we're going to discuss how these emerging products may alter the way people learn, work, and play. In addition, we'll examine the implications for educators with regard to the workload, special needs students, and infrastructure trade-offs.
Douglas had a question about the voice for international airports, and I did a little research. I know the question didn't get asked. Carolyn Hopkins has been doing voice modeling for airports for 40 years, and I think a lot of it has to do with not only her talent, but also the fact that I think there's been some studies that show with people that are in anxious situations or have high anxiety that a female voice is calming.
I discovered in the train stations in Japan that a eastbound train is announced by the woman and a westbound train is announced by the man, and north-south as well. So it helps to distinguish what announcement to pay attention to, but there is a traditional preference for women to make announcements or be the voice of a computer and that sort of stuff, yeah.
So I shouldn't use my monster voice. The train is now departed. The train is now departed.
What direction train would that be?
The southbound train is now departing. Please step onto the platform.
Good morning, Chris and Tony.
Good morning, John.
And welcome, Rick.
All right.
You'll have some input, I'm sure.
Hello.
Rick, you have a very undistracting background.
Yes, keep it nice and simple. Behind that backdrop is a lot of stuff, though. Everything from a 3D printer to PC and you name it. It's all back there.
I think the checks are done. We're about ready to go live, but they'll let us know when they are ready. Welcome to the Education Hour. Today we're going to talk about all the different types of immersive media and their impact on education, training, and ordinary life. From Meta's Metaverse product to various other applications of immersive experiences and their role in preparing people for everyday life. I'm going to start with a very recent Ebony article, November 29th. Morehouse College is making history as the first college or university to offer classes in the metaverse. That is about the metaverse, I guess. It's in a partnership with a VR tech company called Victory XR and a fellow named Professor Orville Hamilton is creating his first full course on the metaverse on Black history. And that's an interesting class. He says that during class, students will wear virtual reality headsets to experience what it was like on a slave ship, take part in the Haitian Revolution, travel the numerous stops on the Underground Railroad, or witness the I Have a Dream speech in virtual 3D space where they can interact with each other using avatars. In that article, they referenced a paper from the Pew Research Center on the metaverse. In it, they examined the nature of a metaverse and its social and economic implications. The word was coined by sci-fi author Neil Stephenson in 1992 in his novel Snow Crash, and in today's terms, the metaverse is the realm of computer-generated, network-extended reality, or XR. And XR is an acronym for representing AR, augmented, MR, mixed, and VR, virtual. Their study looked at 624 technology innovators, developers, business and policy leaders, researchers, and activists. And they provided open-ended responses to a question seeking their predictions about the trajectory and impact of the metaverse by 2040. Will it or won't it be beneficial in a host of areas described? The pandemic gave XR development a big boost. Experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic have accelerated some demand for investment in new and improved online tools, especially in health, business, and educational settings. A number of experts in that study predict people will not be willing to invest their time and energy in virtual spaces in which they can be further manipulated and surveilled by corporate and/or authoritarian interests. I found that very interesting. An article on whiteness of Mastodon in Tech Policy Press cautions how new technologies are failing to provide enough agency for marginalized people and minority groups to form communities unique to their needs. That was published in November 23rd of this year. And they had an interview there with Dr. Jonathan Flowers, who said in the interview, "I'm drawing on John Dewey, who says that communities, individuals, organisms emerge by means of their environment, that is, in transaction with their environment, such that both the individual and the environment are changed. Moreover, they incorporate some element of the environment into how they make their personhood and their individuality present within a variety of spaces." So today, I wanted to start with everyone's view of this XR future and then move to the idea of experiential learning, both in classrooms and in everyday life. Experiential learning is often thought of as field trips, but if we were to incorporate XR infrastructure in schools, would that be experiential learning, and would it be effective? If anyone wants to put their hand up to begin the discussion on this, we can talk about what immersive experiences might be and what experiential learning might be. Want to start it off, Tony?
So thank you, Dave. Interesting enough, I had the director of the program at Morehouse on Conversation with Tony Mobley this week. And part of our conversation was indeed about the her point of view was that a lot of people were getting caught up in the immersive experience on the slave ship, and that it was more than that. It was a broader base opportunity to experience the metaverse. But she emphasized the importance of actually having those experiences of the slave ship. And she went on to talk about the importance of the metaverse being a resource for all people and not just, majority culture. And so it was a fascinating conversation. It was cut short a little bit because of her technical issues that she had, and also the fact that she was in a major incident over the weekend. But I think that technology has always been the great equalizer when it comes to moving a society forward. And this is not different from any other technological advancement that can help a culture develop. And I just think that we as individuals and as a group should push as much as possible to make sure that the resources are available so that all partners can continue to participate in this endeavor.
Thanks, Tony. Let's go to Harshid.
Yeah, so I wanted to speak on how immersion evolves. And last night I was speaking to one of our friends that came on when we were first starting up the Education Hour discussion. And Mandy and I spoke about Roblox, where she mentioned that it's so interesting that she went through some kind of concert thing on there, and the interactiveness where you could go kind of in the hallway, pick up a bunch of merch as you would, and then go into the concert. And just that interactivity she felt was really done well. And then if we look at things such as Google I/O doing it virtually, and how developers are also encouraged to join into the, let's say, sandboxes they have, and you could get yourself a nice one-on-one conversation with a developer by doing that. But to me, it still feels a little disconnected. And then if we look at Apple, as Alex would always say, uses video as their format of explaining things. But where does the interactivity happen? Because in immersion, there's a form of interactivity that could it be, let's say with Facebook, with Metaverse, it's interactivity that we're seeking more so than if it's the format. The format could come from a video source. It could come from an audio source. There's a game that's called Audio Game Hub on Android, and it's a group from New Zealand that made it, and it's just like simple games like playing archery, and you're listening to the buzzing sound. And in the real world, we've seen children, I've seen them on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and there was a simple Bluetooth device where the boy made a device where when he wants to do archery physically, he was able to listen in on the beacon of the beep and release exactly when the beacon and the 2 points meet. And so when we look at immersion, I think physical is still going to be the conqueror of all. We need to still teach kids or adults, like of all ages, that we do need to interact with each other. We don't have to go, completely bonkers with it, but we do need some physical interactivity. And then when it comes to the metaverse, sure, we could drive a interactivity or a process, but we also have to be careful that we don't increase the frequency of a young mind, where when they don't get that frequency met, they don't know what to do with themselves. So it's kind of a balance game. We need to make sure that if it's if you're looking at through goggles, is it going to be bad on your eyes for a long term? If you put earbuds in your ears for, maybe 12 hours, 18 hours a day, is it really good for your ears? So we have to really also look at the human nature of the physical and see where can we go with this.
Thanks for that. Those are interesting points, because the physical interaction with the technology is a factor in the experience. And if it becomes difficult, or actually easier, if we all had Elon's brain implants, then you wouldn't even be fatigued by your interactions, and you would switch it in and out just by thinking about it instead of putting a headset on. Also, we change our behaviors according to what technologies we drop into. Television is a lean back, kind of let it spill over you experience, and computers have been a reach forward and start typing kind of experience. So we do adjust our behaviors. And I'm kind of curious as to when you're doing it immersively, what kind of behaviors might emerge, both in society and individually. We'll go to John Snyder next.
Thanks. I think it's really important to recognize that education is the means, it's not the end. The end is educated individuals. And my concern with immersive education is a lot of times we look at it, it's very affecting emotionally, which can help the learning process, but can also become a distraction. And it's really important to recognize that what we're trying to do is educate humans and have humans retain information. And if our technologies are distracting from that, we should avoid them. And if they support it, we should include them.
Yeah. It occurred to me when reading about the the project, the Black History Project, that some of what they would experience might actually be traumatizing. So I'm sure the professor has looked into supporting students who may have been affected emotionally by what they experienced in that immersive classroom. Rick?
So, I mean, for me, it depends on the type of experience, that makes it immersive. Like for me, virtual reality is kind of an empathy tool. It allows you to put someone in somebody else's shoes. It allows you to put someone in a particular time and space. You can take them back in time. You can put them in the future. It really allows a person to immerse themselves in the environment and it creates empathy. It allows you to experience that. So people can, experience what it's like to be in the middle of a combat zone, or they can, be what it's like experience some ancient architecture and what it looked like, when it existed, or to see a building before it even exists. Other things like, augmented reality, it can enhance your existing environment. Kind of speaking about architecture, you could go to a location and pull up your phone and point it at an object and see what that building was like in its original day, or what it might be like when the new expansions are done, or maybe you could point it at your car's engine and see how the engine works, see the electrical flow, see where the fuel lines are, be able to see through objects and overlay information. And that's, mixed realities getting to that point too, where you're combining the virtual and the augmented and giving yourself a little bit of a mix of both. They all have some amazing tools, but really it's augmenting and supplementing and, allowing people to put themselves in situations that they just can't experience without technologies like immersive medias.
Yeah, I suppose the caution there is that, when the desktop computer first started to be promoted, they said you'd balance your checkbook on it. I don't think I've written a check in 3 years, but we're kind of moving away from sitting at desks and lecturing, and we're starting to use other methods of training and education. And maybe immersive, like you're saying, is a way of having exploration and information presented to you in its context rather than just abstractly. We'll go to Chris for the next remark.
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about the use of immersive technologies to prepare a person to act in the real world, not in a virtual world. And the two examples that come to my mind are flight simulators for training pilots and cabin crew in how to operate an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, especially under crisis conditions, how to respond to emergencies and keep the plane flying level. And then the other example that I've experienced personally is training for escaping from a submerged submarine on the bottom. So with the flight simulator, as I understand it, it's a hybrid system. There's a lot of physical, mechanical simulation of the deck tilts and alarm sound and so forth. It feels like you are physically in a space that's a mock-up, a duplicate of the cabin of the type of aircraft that you're training on. And also the view out the front window, so to speak, is virtual. It's a movie, essentially, or computer-generated image that responds as the terrain would respond if you were actually in flight. And I think it's a very powerful and less dangerous way to train pilots and crew in responding to emergencies, because if the first 2 times they fail, nobody dies. But they know, of course, that they don't have 250 passengers behind them in the cabin, and they know that they're not going to die no matter how clumsily they respond. So it's a simulation in a way that has lower stakes than trying to do this training in actual aircraft above the ground. But also it's missing some of the psychological pressures that could influence your performance in the actual situation. If you're actually landing or taking off in an aircraft, then all of those pressures or possibilities are actually present, not just imaginary. So what we don't want to do is get pilots really good at operating the simulator, the flight simulator, but not being able to fully transfer whatever they got good at the video game version, so to speak, to actual practice. That's a kind of a risk, and that potential gap, has very serious consequences.
Now, let me just jump in and before you finish, because I've got direct experience here. Flight simulations are designed to put you under pressure and to give you an ability to practice response time, decision time, and to work with those pressures. And they actually do put people through the sweat. In the military, or at least in the Air Force that I worked with, they called that a helmet fire, where you're just panicking and you're not really making good decisions. And they try and create situations that are so realistic that you're actually not thinking that it's a simulation anymore. You're actually immersing yourself in it. I can testify that the trainers that they use for commercial jets also do this kind of training, because there's operators in the background monitoring your performance and giving you little nudges to make a mistake. And then you learn more and you feel that psychological pressure that you're saying might be missing. So I'm just cautioning you that they actually do account for that in the training. But you had another side of the discussion.
Right. Well, the other side of it is during my submarine officer training, one of the main training experiences that everyone had to pass wasn't a classroom experience. It wasn't turning the right valves at the right time in a simulator, roughly similar to an aircraft simulator, but it was actually entering at the bottom of a 100-foot tower filled with water and successfully getting to the top without getting the bends, without having your lungs expand faster than your ascent. And of course, that was real. I mean, we really were 100 feet below the surface.
That's fully immersive in the real sense, yes.
Literally immersive. And I don't imagine that there's an alternative, a virtual or simulation that would provide a demonstration that you could actually do that. There were safety divers every 20 feet, and they were capable of stopping you if you were holding your breath and not getting rid of the expanding air in your lungs before it became dangerous. And I don't see an alternative, a virtual alternative for that kind of a high stakes training. And it did eliminate some people who were great at doing all the usual maneuvers and understanding how all the submarine systems operated, but they were not able to be successful in overcoming the fear of being maybe not succeeding at preventing their lungs from bursting.
Sure.
So those are my two thoughts about, or two examples of the limits and the possibilities of this kind of virtual training experience.
And we'll finish with Mark here.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about immersive media through the eyes of an architect who started in the mid 80s and came into an industry that was primarily still analog. You had a set of drawings that a contractor would bid on and a set of specifications which were the written word. And at that point in time, which is still done today, you would sit down with a client, find out what their needs were, you'd develop a program, and then you would show them plans, sections, and elevations, and maybe a rendering, which cost a lot of money to do and had to do by hand. And then as the building was built, you'd see some surprised looks in many clients because what you had drawn on plans wasn't necessarily understood by the client. And that's changed over the years because now we can do renderings and we can show them walkthroughs of what the building will look like. And that has helped immensely our services because the client sees the process all the way through. And to add to that, in the construction, a lot of projects now are done as design build projects rather than the older way of design build, bid build projects. And because it's design build, you're working with the contractors as you're designing the facility. So we will sit there and do clash detection models in where we see all the mechanical systems and where there are clashes with structural systems, and we can actually make changes to the design before somebody puts a shovel in the ground, and that drastically reduces the cost and change orders and things as we go through the construction of a building. So there's been a vast change in our industry over the years because of this type of media.
Thanks for that. John Snyder, you had a question. Let's give you a chance to ask that question.
Yeah, my question is, at what point does media become immersive?
Well, the definition, of course, is that it's an experience that is unique and delivered technologically. So not so much the training for submariners that you have a real immersive experience, but many times people are put in simulations of a situation. In my experience, I had to develop a program for school principals because they could not put a trainee in the chair and run a school because they knew everybody would be on their best behavior and nothing would go wrong. You weren't going to learn how to handle all the mistakes. And so they created a somewhat immersive experience where you were playing a principal for a day and had to delegate, respond to teacher complaints or deal with professional issues as well as parents and all the rest through a 2.5-hour intense session. And I can tell you some of the students actually, they were sweating bullets through that 2.5 hours because it was a very high pressure situation. I'm going to go to Rick and Mark. Did you have something to say about that?
Well, I was just going to say it becomes immersive when you can, in our industry, take the client and put them in a virtual world and let them walk through a building, see the lobby, get a sense of scale and color and just the flow of a space. They can, if it's a residential house, they can see where the bathroom's going to be, where the laundry room's going to be, and they can walk through it and actually start to reach for things and get a sense of space that's not there just by looking at two-dimensional drawings.
Yeah, that's a visualization method to give you the view or the vision of what the designer is doing. Rick?
I feel there's different levels of immersion when it comes to some of these technologies. I mean, there's some very minimal level of immersion would be something like an augmented reality. Let's say we're looking at like a map overlay of something that's showing directional information, over top of like a Google map or your real world environment, like with the Google Lens where you can overlay different things like that. That's kind of like the lowest level of immersion in my sense. And then you kind of work your way up the more you pull yourself into an environment, whether it's through virtual reality or even like augmented spaces, let's say like projecting mapped in spaces, where you walk into an environment and it becomes a completely new environment just through projections or LEDs or, sight, sounds, all that kind of thing. You can really transport someone to another world, or in a VR headset where, everything is completely virtual. We start mixing in things like senses of smell, heat, wind. Those are getting to the point where you're truly immersive. Something like the jump exhibit. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but there's like a skydiving or a wingsuit simulator where they did some ultra high res photogrammetry scans of canyons and mountains. And they have this simulator where you wear a wingsuit with the VR goggles in your helmet and you literally jump off a platform suspended, and when you move, it moves your body through the virtual environment. So there's different levels of it, and I think it depends on just how many senses you're experimenting with. That depends on that level of immersion.
All right, and John Snyder.
Rick, I'm curious, the different levels of immersion, does that require equally higher levels of development? So is augmented reality easier to develop for than like full virtual reality or anything like that?
Well, it kind of depends on, I guess, the delivery method in a lot of ways too. A lot of people almost everybody's got a phone in their pocket, which would allow them to do like augmented reality type applications. Virtual reality headsets, they're becoming more common, but there's still not that many people that have them. And there's even less that'll wear them for hours on end and actually immerse themselves in these. But each have different levels of development. Absolutely. Apple has all kinds of great augmented reality tools that allow you to build augmented applications and functionality, sometimes right on your phone. You can build little AR apps and overlay things in your environment without even leaving an iOS device. Whereas, some of the higher end things, you're talking like, real-time computing with ray tracing and things like, using like Unreal's like nanite technology to do really high polygon counts and have it play back really smoothly to give you ultra realistic immersion. So there's quite a range of development levels of difficulty. And it really, you can get into it with some really simple, easy to use apps, or you can dive deep and really.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah, I think that we've sort of we've been hit with it and not even recognize it from the standpoint of Pokemon and IKEA. IKEA was doing this product placement thing with augmented reality for quite a long time before the big box stores even thought about it, in terms of being able to actually take your furniture and place it and see where, if you like it in this location, or you move it to another location. And so it's been a part of us, and it's been steadily growing. And now more and more retailers are utilizing it. But I know most of us remember the craze with Pokemon, how everybody was in the Pokemon craze. And that's augmented reality. And so it's been with us for a while, and it continues to build.
Yeah, that's right. Even before the pandemic, people were running around parks chasing invisible things. Chris Clark.
I think John's question is a philosophical question in a way. And I think the answer is that it depends on the degree of similarity or convincingness of the media experience and its mapping onto the real world version of that experience. So if I'm engaged in some kind of an immersive media experience, and I'm still aware that this is fantasy. There's not a really good match between what it would have been like to be sailing a sailboat or participating in a virtual version of that. Then it's not fully immersive. But but at the other extreme, if I'm convinced by the experience that it's just like what it would have been like to actually be on the water in a small boat, maneuvering it and responding to changes in the wind and waves, then that's become immersive. So it's more of a sliding scale of match of the experience between the virtual version of it and the real world version of it.
Mm-hmm. We'll finish with Tony on this question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add back that even before the pandemic, we were starting to begin to, in science classes, do dissecting of the frogs and examination of the human heart and the different chambers and all of that kind of information, even prior to the pandemic. So it's been with us.
Thank you for that. I'm going to indulge you guys just once here with a little story about what happened to me recently with an immersive experience. I recently was in Tokyo, and this it's a converted warehouse out on where the shipping area is, so it's a little bit hard to get to. It's called Team Lab Planets, and it's a giant immersive experience. There were hundreds of people lined up to go into this thing. They go in 50 people at a time. You take your shoes and socks off and you roll up your pant legs. You're given a locker room where you can put your stuff, and you're allowed to bring your phone in, take a picture of what's going on, and then you have this immersive experience. The experience included ankle and thigh deep water. It included projections and live flowers that moved. And it's almost impossible to describe a garden of chrome pods that if you move them, they make music. But as you go through this thing, what would you call it, pavilion by pavilion, you have an experience that you'll never forget. One of the rooms is entirely soft. It's actually impossible to walk. So you step into this thing and then tumble because the floor is soft, the walls are soft, and everything won't allow you to stand up. So you have to learn to crawl again. And everyone has to crawl through this room to get to the next pavilion. If you're not able to, there are escape routes. Just the experience of having to resort to crawling like a baby was an immersive experience and quite enlightening in terms of our connection to ourselves. And the experience of each of the pavilions was another factor of who you are as a human. And the water pool was a milky white water about a foot, maybe a foot and a half deep, and children were held so they wouldn't get all wet. And people would stand in this thing, and at first it's just a lot of colors projected onto the white water, but eventually you start seeing them transform into swimming creatures and fish and eels and stuff. And you look down at this and you look around, and if you start moving, the fish move away from you. And if you stand still, they'll swim around you and they'll come and explore you, but they never actually go through you. And the AI that's in the projections knows who's in the room. So there's 50 people in a giant pool, and the AI knows to project around these people. And the experience was almost embryonic or even primitive, that a civilization that was just discovering that you could fish would discover that there are these creatures that have a knowledge that operate in the water. By the time you came out of this thing, you felt more connected to the earth than you did going in. You paid, $40 for the privilege of this experience, but the number of pavilions that were in there to give you this experience were well thought out, AI driven. You were weightless in some of them. You felt dizzy in other ones, but you were given experiences that were more art, but art with a message. And I think it was a groundbreaking concept that might actually be adopted wider. Not so much as a Disneyland kind of experience where you're frightened or you're thrown around by the devices they built, but you're actually exploring how you feel about things while you're experiencing it. I just tell that story because we talked about the diver thing where you have to learn to not surface too quickly, and there are reasons we do physical training. Phys ed and team sports and all that has to be trained with other real people. You can play soccer in a virtual world, but it's never going to have that, hitting each other and falling down kind of thing. I'm going to go to the next question then, John.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, what new tools in media provide a pathway to provide more immersive media than were available 10 years ago? What about 5 years or newer?
Let's start with Mark. Mark Juliet. Oh, you're muted, Mark.
Sorry. Hit it twice, I guess. Anyway, So sticking in the architecture and engineering world, many years ago, we draw two parallel lines and they would represent a wall. That wall would be keyed to maybe a partition table that would tell the contractor what kind of wall it is. And then you'd go to another page and have a detail. Building information modeling came in about 10 or 15 years ago, and it changed in the sense that it was a database. So you would grab an assembly of what wall type you wanted, and now there was a database. So when you were completed with the design, the cost estimators could go through because they had a list of all the materials that were making up of that building. More recently, what's really changed the industry is the gaming world, because the gaming engines have tied together with the graphics cards, and what would take minutes from a simple rendering to hours or days for a complex walkthrough to render now happen instantaneously. So the designers can actually see as they design a building how it's changing in real time and what shadows may occur on an elevation by utilizing certain devices. And so you get a much different representation of foreground and background. Clients can be walked through in real time as you make these changes. So it's really incredible what's happened to our industry.
In my field, pre-visualization has emerged in the last 5 or 15 years. It's where special effects people can actually see on a monitor what their effect is going to look like, and the performers in that scene or in that scenario can actually act against real images instead of having to imagine what's going on. Rick, you're next.
Well, I've got several things I wanted to kind of discuss, but touching on what Mark had mentioned about the real-time technologies, I think that's probably one of the biggest developments that I think are really going to change a lot of things. And it affects so many industries, from architectural to gaming to video productions and,
shipping and
so many
logistics
things.
And that.
Yeah. Just to be able to do this in real time is just amazing. But some of the other technologies that kind of work with this, I think that are pretty big, are things like types of 3D capture, like volumetric capture, where you're able to capture a video scene and then be able to put yourself in any position in that scene. For example, Intel's Freeview or 3D, it's changed a few names now, but they use that for some of the NFL games where they do the matrix style playbacks, where you can put yourself into the position of the player. They actually have a be the player type view, where once they capture the scene, you can actually put yourself in any of the positions of any player or any space on that field. So that, volumetric capture is kind of like taking photogrammetry and applying it to video. And now you're looking at things like NeRFs or neural radiance fields, which are allowing you to capture things that were difficult with volumetric. So volumetric, it's really hard to capture. It's like a math-based capture. So it's hard to capture things like glass or reflective materials, things like that, where NeRFs, it's a neural radiance field, and it's actually capturing how the light is reflected in a scene, which is allowing people to capture glass and metal and other shiny objects. Another big development, and it's kind of been around for a while, but it's really come a long way, is virtual humans or digital twins, allowing you to be able to accurately capture a person and recreate them in a 3D environment and animate them. The thing about a digital human is they don't age, they don't get sick, they don't get pregnant, they don't get acne, they don't gain weight, they don't lose weight, they don't show up sick. They're, you have a digital
you want
twin.
them to, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Unless you create that narrative. Yeah. On that sense, there's some like body tracking and facial tracking. Like, before we had to have some really expensive gear to do this. Now we're getting to the point where you can do facial tracking with an iPhone. Like suits like Rococo are coming down, and even Sony just came out with Mocapi, which is like a really, it's like a $360 mocap style, piece of technology that allows you to be able to do this stuff on a really small budget. It's not as accurate, but it's still coming a long way. Virtual production, I think, is another really big one. That's where we're taking these real-time game-like engines and driving virtual environments in real time. Like, so they have these sets that are comprised of giant LED walls that are used to put real-time actors and environments into these virtual sets and then track them with cameras, allowing them to change the perspectives. And you use the LED panels to actually light the subject. So you get real-world reflections off of glasses and glass and chrome and things like that. And this allows people to, you can change set locations within minutes or hours, depending on what kind of a set you have. And I think that's really changing everything. And then on that sense, AI, artificial intelligence, to be able to feed a text prompt or a couple of images and to be able to have an AI crank out incredible imagery. And some people are using like stable diffusion to create real-time virtual reality environment. So you can actually create a virtual environment from scratch, just your imagination using AI, and the limits are, there's no limitations in my opinion. It's just like you dream it, you can experience it.
Great points. John?
Yeah, in the past 10 years in the corporate training world, the people were really excited about VR and AR, but it turned out to be incredibly expensive to develop and deploy and scale. And so really it's only used in high stakes scenarios like flight simulations or places where you put people's lives in safety instead of a place of danger. What's really come up in the corporate training world is additional tools to create simulations that can help the processes in the brain that need those judgments and need those scenarios to come out. What we're seeing right now and coming soon is the use of AI to auto-generate some of those sorts of conversations. And so for the call centers, what I'm starting to see are tools where it will listen to a whole bunch of calls and then have an artificial human call into the trainee and analyze what the person's doing on their computer to make sure that they're following the right steps and have it not just be a rote repetition.
Okay, we'll move through some questions. Next one.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. What price point will be needed to make immersive content mainstream in education? Would it be the Meta Quest 2, $329 to $429 USD, or would something less expensive be needed?
I guess my first reaction before we get back to you, John, is that the infrastructure that's behind the Quest 2 is probably the significant cost. So, John, you want to add to that?
100% right. It's not just the cost of the equipment and deploying it. It's maintenance, repair, making sure things stay updated. So there's whole recurring costs for that. There's development time costs, which is the most expensive thing, is building the training materials in the first place.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, what are the social repercussions of media becoming even more immersive than it already is? What has the recent past taught us now that several lifetimes of eye-seeking content are ever present in our pockets?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I made a little list of things that I think are possible social consequences. One is the possibility of social isolation. People who choose to live in a virtual immersive world as an alternative to getting out of the office and into society. Mm-hmm. A lot of this was alluded to during the pandemic with regard to going to school versus participating in school at a distance through Zoom or other distance technology. And relatedly, I think it will be harder to refine one's theory of mind. That is, to understand that other people have a different view of the world than I do. If I'm not practicing with actual other people who actually do have a different theory of mind or view of the world than I do, then I'm imagining that capacity to read other people, to read situations, to connect,
respond. Yeah,
it would be a cost. I've read about, but don't fully understand, deep fakes and the possibility of identity theft or through technology posing as someone whom you're not and using that for nefarious purposes, as well as misrepresentation of yourself. If I were to go on a dating app, I could misrepresent myself as taller than I am today, or with less gray hair and more of the brown hair that I grew up with, and so forth, with whiter teeth, without all the inconvenience of teeth whitening. And finally, I think there's a looming threat to artists. I've seen various advertisements or reports of AI producing works of art, and some of them are kind of clunky and obviously not as artistically made as others, but some of them are convincingly competitors for those who produce art in the traditional ways. Then that could apply to music as well, composed and performed by AI rather than by human musicians and composers. So that's my short list.
Oh, thanks for that. And
things to think about.
To even add to your list, the concerns about surveillance. When you're in the virtual world, that isn't cameras that's watching you, it's the entire AI that's watching you. Rick, we'll bring it home with you.
So, I mean, I want to touch back on the isolation. I think that is a real issue, especially with virtual reality. And it's kind of interesting because, that makes it a challenge for, because I do like group presentations in VR. It's like when one person puts a headset on, sometimes you can put like what they're seeing like on a screen, but no one else is really in that immersion with you. So there's a bit of isolation between you, spectators around you, and that kind of thing that really isolates you. But on the same, but kind of flipping that around though, one of the interesting things with VR and mixed reality is like it allows you to be collaborative with people on the other side of the planet. So you could actually go into a virtual environment together and collaborate with someone, miles from you, and still somehow, even though you're isolating yourself physically in that space, you're connecting with people that you could not have in other ways before.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. There are people, engineers, who collaborate with a screen beside them that's connected to, say, Indonesia, and they have a partner there they're working with, and they just leave the live feed up all day and say, "Hey, George, are you there? Well, I'm dealing with this problem," and then they explain it and collaborate in real time. And in the virtual world, if it's not a helmet, headset kind of virtual world, but it's just inside your glasses, then people can collaborate even more easily. One more with Mark.
Just to add on to what was just said, we spend many phone calls during a day, or Teams meetings or Zoom meetings or what have you, on the phone with engineers all over the country and world for that matter, just discussing the designs. We're not putting on a set of goggles to make it that virtual, but we're looking at screens and sharing screens and walking through those models to talk about whatever might need to be talked about for that day.
I've done presentations with teachers at teachers' conventions regarding the impact of multimedia and all the rest. And I usually finish by saying if the real world is still more interesting than the virtual or the distracting world, then kids will find the balance. We have a pretty strange differential now. It's much more interesting with VR right now. But as time goes on, a gamer actually finds because it's constructed, there's not an infinite limit. Now, if it's not constructed and it's AI responding to you, then it could entice you to stay there. So, yeah, that's a social issue as well. Next question.
Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. asks, for university and professional level training scenarios, the panel has given multiple good examples of immersive media usage. But what about younger students? Should there be a minimum age or experience level before immersion media training, or the sooner the better?
We'll start with Rick.
So it depends on what type of immersive media you're talking about. With kids, my kids love augmented reality. They use their iPads to play augmented games where they can interact with their surroundings. My daughter uses these coding blocks where you can actually lay these blocks in front of the iPad and it'll see the coding blocks and you can solve puzzles in your game and navigate through the game by using these little coding bits and pieces. But things like virtual reality, you're looking at things that might cause issues like development of their eyes and things like that, where you might not want a younger kid who's still developing that physically to not be immersed for too long. It's something you want to be aware of, that you're not, that they're still developing, and those could have some physical effects on them. So, depending on the type of immersive media, I would probably more favor things like augmented reality versus a virtual reality for a younger student, or at least limiting their exposure to it.
Okay. And Chris?
I think kids are way ahead of us in the sense that their imaginations constitute a virtual reality that they live in. And I think gradually, as adults, we've let that imagination atrophy. We're not as charmed by imaginary scenarios, or it takes more effort to suspend disbelief when we attend a Broadway show, or it takes a lot more infrastructure to make it to signal to us that it's okay to suspend disbelief because of this work of art that we're witnessing and participating in. So my prediction is we'll learn a lot more about the limits and possibilities of virtual immersive experiences, immersive media, from children participating in immersive media, things that we adults don't imagine or pay attention to or experience when we participate in the same or similar immersive media experiences. Now, I accept the caution that there could be risks to children, and I think those need to be taken seriously. And I think we shouldn't be overly protective, because we have a lot to learn and children have a lot to learn by trying these things out in ways that inform us about where the guardrails ought to be and where the possibilities are that perhaps go beyond what elders like ourselves predict or intend.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, a big thank you goes out to all the people who submitted questions today and every day. You're the community who make these discussions possible. As well, I'd like to acknowledge all the people who volunteer every single day to operate the integrated systems of office hours and after hours, and recognize their dedication for nearly 1,000 days and counting. We thank you along with today's panelists who provided valuable insight in today's subject. Thank you. Join us again next week when we'll be hosting John Corripo, who will speak to us about student-led lesson frames from 2 books called the Edu Protocol Field Guides. So we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good show.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Very
Thanks, Mark.
nice.
Dave and Mark look like twins.
I learned a lot about
Side by side.
architecture today.
We'll do that. They were talking about what Mark was looking like Chris Pine or something. Is that this morning? Yeah. No, it was Nigel. Nigel looks like Chris Pine, and maybe Mark and I should be put in that side by side and see if we were brothers of another mother. But anyway, thanks for being here, guys. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Today.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.